Hey YouTube family and GN subs, Humberto from GrayLaw TV, and today we're going to talk all about Stokes marriage interviews. When immigration separates you in a marriage case, it could be really scary, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the tools by which you're going to survive. You're going to get through this, not a problem. So what is a Stokes interview? So there was a case out of New York Federal District Court. It's called Stokes v. INS. And what this case said, in essence, is that when immigration investigates a marriage case, it has to be reasonable. That's the standard. So the case means that there has to be a framework in which immigration adjudicates these cases. Now, although this case only applies to New York, immigration has used this across the U.S. as a standard by which to conduct marriage interviews, okay? So let me give you a beginning tip, all right? So here is a link to the adjudicator's field manual. So this is how the officer must conduct an interview. If you go through it and you read it, you'll be amazed. I mean, it talks about the officer's conduct, what they should do, how they should conduct themselves. And basically it says they need to act reasonable, okay? So that's the first thing that you need to know, is that an officer has an obligation to conduct an interview a certain way, must be professional, must be reasonable, etc., all right? Take a peek at it before you go into your interview, and you'll be surprised at the obligation of the officer. All right, so what actually causes a Stokes interview? Now, when the officer calls you into the interview, the officer has discretion, right? These are the things that I find that lead to a Stokes interview. And again, the officer has discretion even after they start an interview. They can start the interview where you guys are together, where the petitioner and the beneficiary are together in the interview, and they can separate you. One of you waits in the lobby while the other one is being interviewed, okay? They usually do a Stokes interview when they suspect that there's fraud. Let's say there's a large age difference between the beneficiary and petitioner. Poor attitude. Oh, that's a big one, guys. I tell you, if you go in there with a poor attitude, the officer can say, okay, I'm going to separate you. Okay, you don't want to do that. Have a good attitude, right? Big one, lack of evidence. If you come in there and you have no joint documentation, there's going to be a Stokes interview. They're going to separate you. Okay. And another big one is prior I-130 petitions. If you've had prior I-130 petitions, even if there's no fraud in those prior I-130 petitions, they may suspect that the marriage is fraudulent. They may separate you. All right, how do you avoid a Stokes interview? Be courteous, be kind, be calm, right? You get in there into the interview, be on your best behavior, okay? Provide the officer initially with your evidence. That is key. If you have good evidence, have it in a nice, neat pile, present it to the officer, okay? And then the officer will look at it, and chances are that there will not be a Stokes interview. All right, so let's say they separate you. Here we go, folks. Stokes interview. Stay calm, okay? Stay calm. Biggest piece of advice, do not guess. So you're in there by yourself, right? And the officer is asking you questions. There's a question that you don't know the answer to. Do not guess, because when your spouse comes into the interview, they're going to ask the same questions, okay? And when they get to that question, if you've guessed an answer, let's say your spouse has the correct answer, provides the correct answer, now you've provided an answer that's inconsistent. That is not good, and that's certainly going to lead to either a denial or notice of intent to deny. So do not guess. Biggest piece of advice this whole video, okay, is worth it, is do not guess. What does the officer ask, okay? Basically, how you met, where you met, who proposed to who. They ask about the home where you live, how many bedrooms, okay? They ask about the kitchen, about the areas. They ask about how did you get to immigration today? Did you drive? Whose car? Who drove? Etc. They always ask about what you did last weekend. They ask about each other's family, your parents, brothers, sisters, etc. Usually the questions are pretty reasonable, okay? They don't ask questions that you don't know the answer to. So just stay calm and do not guess. That's the key. Last piece of advice, after the interview, you and your spouse, you go home and you write down the questions and answers, okay? I'm sure when you're in the car, you're on the way home, you guys are going to be talking about it anyway. But when you get home, write it down, okay? Once the Q&As are written down, you know if you were inconsistent on some of the questions and answers, you can start gathering evidence in the event that the officer issues what's called a notice of intent to deny. If there are inconsistent answers, then the officer may, if there's enough, the officer may issue what's called a notice of intent to deny. You're going to have to respond to that, and you're going to have to provide evidence to controvert that. So, you'll have time if you start writing down the Q&As to start gathering the evidence if you're going to need to, and you're going to have a record of what happened. Because if you don't, you're going to forget, and you're not really going to understand, what the officer is getting at on that notice of intent to deny. All right? There you have it, folks. Stokes interview, not a problem. Thanks so much for watching GrayLaw TV. Click below, like, and subscribe.